All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is Dave, and real quick, let me get a sip of this old coffee here. I wanted to give a real quick shout out to the old Blue Ridge Bigfoot. You guys can find Mike out there on the old YouTube doing some awesome encounter stories from the Blue Ridge area out there back east. Tell you what, thanks, man, for being here and following along as well. Just want to say that. Also, want to give a shout out to. I am now a true fan of JP Choquette in Choquette, Choquette. JP, just want to say I love your book. So a big shout out to the lady from Vermont. If you are really into some really cool like edge of your seat Bigfoot novels, this is now probably my favorite one. There's a few books in my life I've read that kept me on the edge of the seat that I just didn't want to put down, but I have 5 kids, so there's kids coming out of the woodworks in my house. But I have to say, it is just it was kind of like that old book, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. It was like that for me. It was just the way that she brought out the scenery, the characters, and this somewhat benign Bigfoot in a way, yeah, but it was perfect. It was perfect storytelling. I loved it. Thank you very much, JP. You guys get it. It's called Shadow in the Woods. Anyways, if you are not signed up yet, you can get over to PacWestBigfoot.com, PacWestBigfoot.com. Go ahead and sign up there. And next month, I'm going to be giving away an awesome little coffee mug from the old PacWest Bigfoot store. So there you go with that. And that's it. I'll be announcing a new winner next month, right at the beginning of the month. And until then, let's get going with this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. The Boy and the Gifting Tree. Boy gifts with a Bigfoot near Galice, Oregon. I was young, 10 years old, in fact, when I started gifting a Bigfoot back in the early 1980s near Galice, Oregon. We lived pretty far out of Grants Pass area, out past Merlin along Galice Road at the time. Today the old trailer is gone, the property is barren, and my folks sold it in the latter part of the 1980s, actually, and we moved down south to Phoenix, Oregon, just down the road. But before we would leave, I would have the most interesting time of my life, about 4 or 5 months of it. I was gifting with a Bigfoot, but I have to say there were some scary moments during this time, and that is why I suggest if you gift and leave. Do not try to befriend a wild animal. They are wild after all. The Gifting Tree. I love the wilderness, even today. I am an avid and staunch believer in Bigfoot because I've seen one up close within about 30 feet, give or take. And actually, I saw 2. But I am not an idiot, suffice it to say, and as a 10-year-old, I was not mature enough, I believe, to understand the situation I was in. Gifting or not, being close to such a creature, intelligent or not, is dangerous. There are people who have paid the price messing with snakes, alligators, and lions for that matter. Same goes for Bigfoot. Be careful when you find yourself in their midst. They are still a wild thing, unpredictable, and have a propensity for getting angry or irritable real quick. They did, or it did with me once. I never forgot the lesson, even today. Here's what happened to me and what I experienced and saw with my own 2 10-year-old eyes. Hey, where'd my G.I. Joe go? I was 10 years old and just turned 10 a few days before I started noticing some weirdness on our property just outside Merlin, Oregon. We lived between Merlin and Galice on a small piece of property, like I said, no more than 6 to 7 acres, I remember. It was pretty wooded out that way. If you were to look at a map today online, you'd see that, for the most part, out towards Galice, the woods were pretty thick, and mountains and hills are everywhere. Our property towards the road, where the mighty, wild, and scenic Rogue River wound through, was mostly bare of trees, until you got down to the river and crossed the road. In the back of us, however, was all forest, trees that ran flat on about 2 acres, where the land started to gradually and finally run uphill and beyond. There was no real town between us and that, just the wilderness. But suffice it to say, I was 10, and my parents were now letting me play more freely about on the property. About 3 days or so after my birthday, I got home from school and being treated and being treated and being a awesome sunny spring day, I decided to head to my favorite spot to play with the new GI Joes I'd got as gifts. There was a small clearing in the trees that was way back off a small game trail on the property. The fence, barbed wire that ran around the property could be seen just inside the tree line west of the clearing. It was cool. It was like my own piece of the property on the land, if you will. I had 3 to 4 figures, G.I. Joe figures in a Jeep, plus some airship of some kind I recall. I dug in the dirt, used logs and everything around me to build a cool fortress and so on for my collection. I had a great imagination, but unfortunately, because of that imagination, my parents would miss out on something huge in my life, I believe. I was playing that day as usual when I finally heard the ear-piercing whistle my dad used in the local lumber mill to get the attention of people pulling chains sometimes. I grabbed everything up and headed in for homework and dinner and a little television, of course. After dinner, I remembered heading off to take a shower real quick when I noticed one of my G.I. Joes was missing. It was a Cobra Trooper. I thought about it for a moment and remembered that I'd left him on the stump near the trees. He was my sniper and needed the high ground. It was dusk, and I asked my mom and dad if I could run back and get it, but that was out of the question. It was getting too dark for them to let me go back there. The next day, Wednesday, back then we had an early day where we would get out of school a couple hours early every Wednesday. So when I got home, I dropped off my backpack and headed out to collect my soldier and play for a bit. That is when things started getting weird, and when I would eventually, a few weeks later, see something that would change my world for good. I reached the open area, and I could not for the life of me find the Cobra figurine. I looked around at the ground, and nothing. It had disappeared. I thought nothing of it much other than maybe a bird or some small rodent grabbed it, thinking it was its color of bright blue made it food. I noticed no tracks around of anything that approached the area, but I did notice a few broken branches just off the game trail. But at the time, it meant nothing to me, but it soon would. Mumbler of the woods. That same day, the day I could not find my Cobra figure, I decided to see if I could attract whatever animal or maybe a bird of prey to the stump again by leaving out some food. So I ran back to the house, grabbed some grapes sitting in the fridge, just a small handful I remember, and left them there on the stump for the night. On Thursday, I wanted to see if the grapes were there, so after entering the house, I tossed my backpack down again, told my mom I was heading out to play, and hit the trail to the open area. To my surprise and wonderment, the figurine was there. The one I'd lost, but the grapes were gone. My heart, even for a 10-year-old, was racing. Even at that age, I knew that some bird or fox or rabbit or bobcat was not going to bring back a toy and take the grapes. That had to be a person. I was a little nervous at first, but after a few moments I calmed down and decided to play a bit. I was starting to dig out a bunker for my guys when I heard what sounded like, mumbling off down the game trail. I also noticed more broken branches, but this time some were laying on the ground, not halfway hanging off the trees. They were not there the day before. I was sure of that. The mumbling continued, too. It sounded like my dad if he were trying to make a deep, funny voice from across the house or something. However, it did have a sort of animal quality to it, like someone speaking a different language and grunting it out all at the same time. I hope you get my drift, but that is the best way to explain it. I was now getting freaked out a bit, and the sun was down below the trees at that point, casting dark shadows everywhere, and seeing into the trees beyond 15 yards or so was out of the question. Suddenly, I heard movement to my right, eastward if you will. It sounded like something was moving off and up the hill next to the property. I grabbed all my toys I could and headed quickly back to the house. I told my mom what I'd heard and what had happened with the grapes and Cobra figure. She knew my imagination well, like I said, too well. She did listen, I'll give her that, but she brushed it off. Later on, I would come to know she started to take me more serious, but by then, I'd seen the thing already. Here, Bigfoot, Bigfoot, Bigfoot. So, I young manned up, I guess you could say, about a week later. I decided to see what was or who might be taking things. I did not want to stay long. As a matter of fact, I only young manned up long enough to get out there and leave something on the stump and run back to the house as fast as I could. I did not play out there after the first experience, but I was not too afraid, however, to try and learn more about what was out there. Besides, I had a bow and arrow, and I was a pretty good aim. This time, I had left a larger toy, a G.I. Joe Jeep. The next day after school, the Jeep was on the ground inside the hole I had started digging but did not finish the day I heard the mumbling. That hole was about 6 to 7 feet away from that stump, and this time I looked around in the dirt for tracks. What I saw was not clear as I was hoping for, but I swear I could see heel impressions right next to the hole. I looked up and started looking around and into the tree line and suddenly heard a grunt-like sound from the east of me. After a moment it turned into the mumbling again, and that is when I turned and walked quickly back to the house. And yes, I told my mother again, and although it seemed to me she was listening, I was not sure she believed me still. At that point, I was actually a little mad at her, I have to admit. I started wondering what grunts besides a bear, and what mumbles in the forest around here besides people. I asked my good friend, my best friend River, at school the next day if he had any idea. His answer was quick and pointed. Bigfoot, dude. We chatted through recess about it, and I ran to the library after school to grab a book about it. Them, whatever they are. That night I read practically the whole book, the first and last time I did that in a single day since. I knew it. It was a Bigfoot, I was sure of it. After reading this book, I think it was Apes Among Us, I knew then the property had a Bigfoot visiting it. The next day I decided I would leave another gift for it, this time food. Why not? I figured the food might bring it in closer to me while I was leaving it if it got used to finding it. And boy did it. For the next 2 weeks, I kept what I was doing to myself, and I took only what I knew would not be missing from my parents. So I took crackers one day, an apple, an orange, and once I took some broccoli. Funny. And as a reference for some out here doing research, the crackers were not taken. However, they were smashed up as if it just smashed them where they sat. Everything else was taken. I'll never forget the figure. My parents did catch on. I guess the broccoli was my effort to get rid of it, and they knew it. I laugh. But before they would venture out to see what I was up to, I had seen something that would scare me, fascinate me, and spur something in me from that point on in life to take more consideration in the unbelievable before I label something unbelievable. A month and a half would go by, and spring was getting warmer, yet wetter here in the Pacific Northwest as usual. I remember it was a Friday after school. I got off the bus, and as usual I headed in the house and right out the back with a handful of bread. It was wet outside, and the dry, loose dirt, kind of muddy and open area was still pretty muddy. And once again I saw impressions. This time, however, I could see toes. I honestly thought about telling my parents, but I figured they would still think I was joking around, or it was just my imagination. I did mention Bigfoot over dinner that night, and my dad said he was a believer, surprisingly enough. And on top of that, he was serious when he had said it. He began to tell my mom and me that his dad, Grandpa Phil, had found some weird tracks, footprints actually, up and around Rainy Falls area when he was young. He remembered them clearly and described them as huge, much like what I saw earlier that day. He also told us Grandpa's stories that came from the gold miners up around that area. Still, he did not mention anything about them being this close to civilization, and not in our backyard for that matter. Saturday morning, and instead of watching Captain Caveman, I decided to go out and see if the one in my backyard liked the bread. I got to the clearing and was not surprised to see that it did all of it. I was also amazed by all the large footprints around the area in the mud. They were not as clear as the one the day before, but you could tell something big was in the area the night before. But to my even bigger surprise, it was still there. I was starting to set out some more food, this time 2 Rice Krispie treats, when I heard movement from the east of the open area. My heart was pounding as I turned around to see what looked like a giant shadow of a man standing just inside the trees down the game trail. It was a chilly gray morning, dark as usual that early, but you could see plain as day the outline of a massive Bigfoot with arms longer than I was tall, standing there, facing me from down the trail. I was so scared I could not move, not at first at least. It looked like it was a massive bulk of a person. The head seemed cone-shaped, but I could not be sure. It was pretty dark down that trail. But the shoulders were huge. The top of the body filled up the width of that trail, and then some. And there was no real separation, I recall, of head from chest. The head was cone-shaped, I suppose you would say, but no neck for sure. It also seemed to be hunched over a bit and leaning forward. It stood there, and for a few seconds it was as still as me. But after a couple more seconds, it started to sway back and forth and made that all too familiar mumbling sound as it looked off to the side of the clearing near me. That is when I felt like I was having a heart attack. For a 10-year-old, that's a scary kind of feeling to have. Movement. It came from in between the Bigfoot that stood there, but to the north a bit. It sounded like something walking, and it was. Not a few seconds later, another smaller Bigfoot appeared. It was about half the size of the other and stood looking up at it. At least it looked that way through the dark. After that, they turned and walked off and disappeared into the trees. The dark shadows were gone. I did not get to see too much of them, other than the shape for the most part, but I could see that they had no clothes on and were in fact covered in fur or hair. I ran like lightning back to my house. Little Bigfoot. Personally, I believe I was gifting with the smaller Bigfoot about 5 foot tall. The larger one, I was sure, reached 10 feet tall, but I was 10 years old, and everyone older than me was 10 feet tall. But looking back, my best guesstimate would not change. But, as I said, I believe I was gifting with the smaller of the two, and maybe, well, I like to believe it so. But I think the larger one was a female. Something just felt like it was. And of course, the younger one was maybe a young, teen-like male. I guess I will never know, and after that moment of seeing them, we never had anything else go missing or show up for that matter afterwards. I did hear the mumbling from time to time, and I found the impressions still left for months after that. But eventually, I didn't hear anything. We ended up moving to Phoenix, Oregon later on. I am a believer today, of course, but still a little reluctant to tell many people or jump on the Bigfoot bandwagon I see today. I guess I will just enjoy the fact of what a young man experienced with a Bigfoot one spring in Oregon and leave it there, for now at least. Thanks, Gregory.